Okay, so welcome to the session 3 of the Caregiver Education Series. Today we're doing the second part of addressing problem behaviors. My name is Yaniz, Padilla, and I'm a supervisor at the Outpatient department here at VIA. So last week we talked about what problem behavior is, the ABCs of problem behavior, and we talked about the function or why problem behavior occurs. Do you guys remember some of the functions of problem behavior? Some of the reasons kids have problem behavior?
Challenges being able to communicate.
Like what are some of the functions? What are they trying to get when they're engaging in problem behavior?
Like attention?
Attention, that's right.
Avoiding.
So escape or avoidance, perfect. Yeah, so that's what we talked about last week. And today what we're going to do is talk about how to manage these problem behaviors and how to understand these behaviors. And really how to identify the functions of your own child's problem behavior. So last week I gave everybody a handout, and I know some people did not listen into last week, so I'm gonna pause here for a minute so that people can grab that handout and then write down their child's the problem behavior they're concerned about, and then kind of define it. So we're pausing right now so that, how are you? So that you can write down a problem behavior that you're concerned about and define it. Do you have any channels?
I've got one.
Okay, perfect. So I'll give you a minute to do that, and then I'll restart.
I don't remember that one.
Do you have a new one?
Yeah, because I left mine because I was out this morning getting things below me and stuff. And
So, I mean, if you remember what you wrote last week, you can, I think last week you wrote about his aggression.
yeah, I know that was one of the main ones.
Yeah. And as I go through, you can fill in a little bit more detail.
I have something called essential tremors, which makes handwriting very difficult for me.
Oh,
So
maybe you could just do it in your
Sure.
head, and then we can talk about it at the end.
Yeah.
We really used this data sheet a lot last week, and today we're just going to kind of analyze the kids' behaviors. So we can just do it out loud. Okay. So developing an intervention for problem behavior is a process that involves various steps, and we discussed a few of them last week. First, you have to observe the situation. Then you have to pick apart those ABCs. Do you remember what the ABC stands for from last week?
Antecedent.
Yes, antecedent is the A. You have a cheat sheet on your data sheet if you need to look down. Behavior.
Also, I did know that one.
Oh. And then the last one is the consequences.
So I did know those two. The first one is the one that
Antecedents.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Hillary, do you have the handouts from last week?
Oh, we just gave that to you.
Oh, this is last
Yep.
week?
Mhm.
Okay.
So then as we practiced last week, we have to define that target behavior really carefully. And what we did not talk about last week that we're going to talk a lot about today is collecting data. Then we have to review our data, and based on our data, we have to analyze it and hypothesize. So why is this behavior occurring? What's the function of the behavior? And then after we collect data, we can't figure it out, we have to go back and collect more data. And then finally, once we know the function, we match that intervention to the function so that that will change the things in the environment that are contributing to the behaviors. So if this intervention is not effective, then you'll go back to collecting data. And I think that's something that it doesn't come natural when you just have your child or your grandchild going back and continue to analyze your child's behavior. Hi, come on in.
Was a little late.
Oh, don't worry about it. We have some handouts. Do you have the hand? I have some extras.
Perfect.
So everybody's kind of written down an example of their child's problem behavior.
Okay.
And now we're going through how, like, the process for addressing problem behavior.
Okay.
But we just started, so.
Okay.
So if you have any questions, did you observe last week's?
No, I was not. I was out of town for work.
Okay, so if you have any questions as we go along about things that we talked about last week, feel free to kind of chime in.
Thank you.
Okay. So if that intervention that we put in place doesn't work, we go back and collect more data. And like I said, that's something that as parents doesn't come very naturally, like looking at your child's behavior and collecting data and trying to analyze it. Because what we do as parents typically is react in the moment, right? And try an intervention at the moment when the behavior is occurring. What we're asking you guys to do is then look back and analyze. There's something going on with that? You couldn't see the video? Okay. So it looks like you couldn't see the video before, so I'm just going to show you this. This is the slide that we've been looking at. So basically we've talked about today's focus and we've gone through these. Just so you know, I just found out that we weren't getting any video for you guys online. Okay, so let's look at all these steps now piece by piece, okay? So like I said, the first step is in developing the intervention is to look at situations, kind of like we did last week. And there are several questions that you want to ask yourself. On the antecedent end, you want to think about, so who is present in the environment when this behavior occurred? Where was the child? Where and when does the behavior occur? So does it happen more in the evening? Does it happen more in the morning? You know, we've talked about that last week. Or what is the child doing before that target behavior occurs? So there's a lot of things to look at in the antecedent side when you're observing. In terms of the behavior, you want to know, can the child communicate? Is the child able to communicate their needs? And this is very important for children diagnosed on the autism spectrum, because problems with language may frustrate they may be frustrated their inability to communicate, and that's why you may be seeing some of those problem behaviors. And then obviously for the behavior, then you want to describe what exactly is the child doing. And finally, it's really good to know what is the current plan, how are people responding to the behavior. And last week we also talked about intentional and unintentional consequences. So we may have a strict behavior plan in the school and at home, but little brother may be laughing every time that the child engages in a behavior, or there may be other consequences that we may not be controlling that may also be impacting that behavior. So it's really important to look at not just what you're doing, but what the environment is doing after the behavior happens. So like a child that may be throwing something, there may be also a really loud bang from that throw, and that's a consequence, right? So just be really aware it's not just what you're planning for. And we talked about this a lot last week. The second step, defining the target behavior. But just to reiterate, this is one of the most important things of addressing the behavior. It's to clearly and precisely define, to make sure that everyone involved knows exactly what the behavior we're looking at is. So if you show to an IEP meeting and then teacher's saying, oh, his problem behavior has decreased by 80%, and you're like, no, it has not. You guys may be defining the problem behavior differently. So what they may be saying is decreased aggression, but you're looking at screaming, or something different. So when you define the target behavior, it is really important that it's easily observable. So this means that if somebody reads the definition, they look at the child, they can tell that that's the behavior you're looking at. For example, instead of saying, oh, the child is being disrespectful, you could say the child's sticking his tongue out. So being disrespectful is very different for different people. So what somebody may seem, oh, it's very disrespectful, somebody may not seem that it's disrespectful at all. So it's really important that you make it really observable. Also that it's very specific. So for example, if the target behavior is aggression, I know some families that wrestle with their kids, and part of how their dads play with them is like roughhousing and just wrestling. So when the boys are wrestling, another mom would say, oh, they're being aggressive. And then one mom might say, oh no, that's how they play. So it's really important that even with those like general kind of observable things like aggression, that we define what's aggressive for you. I have some parents that just grabbing things out of their hand, they consider aggression. So I have to be really sensitive to what they consider as a problem, because if I'm not treating exactly what they want, then it's not going to impact their life. And then the third piece is that it's measurable and quantifiable. So this means that you should be able to measure it in some way. For example, you can count the number of times a kid hits somebody else. You can measure the time that a child is crying and things like that. So it's important to have like a measuring system. So I'm going to give you, we did one of these last week, but I'm going to give you a few examples of a clear definition and a poor definition. So a clear definition is Bill hits other people with his open palm or closed fist from 6 inches or more, scratches, bites, pinches, and throws objects at people. A poor definition, and we do see this in some IEPs sometimes, is he is aggressive. Again, on the left, it's clear what you're looking for, and on the right, you don't really know. You have to define it yourself when you see it. If the child's engaging in a behavior, you're like, is that aggression? Oh, that looks like aggression. Obviously, there's going to be some things that are obvious if the child slaps somebody in the face, and there's going to be things that are not as obvious if the child's pulling on your arm really hard. Is that part of aggression? On the second here, Savannah gets out of her seat for 3 seconds or more, touches other students, taps her pencil on her desk more than 3 times in a row. And the poor definition is she's disruptive in class. Again, what one teacher finds disruptive, another teacher may completely not be fazed by. So it's really important that when we're collaborating with parents or teachers that we're really clear about what we're looking at. Okay, so once we have that definition set, we need to start collecting some data. So for example, and you have to collect data before and after treatment. So a lot of people look at data after treatment only, like how is he doing? But it's really important to look at that baseline. So the baseline is collected for various reasons: to develop the hypotheses, why is this behavior occurring, and then to compare with treatment data. And then the treatment data is collected to evaluate whether this is working or not. And something I also like to do is take some treatment components out and also collect data and see if it's still working, to see if we can find the most simplest treatment. So sometimes we put in like a really complicated treatment that may not be sustainable for a long period, and then we kind of take pieces out and see if the behavior stays low, just to make it very, very simple. So data can also help us maintain this years down the line. So it's kind of hard to keep a token economy with a child at home for multiple years. So you may want to kind of take pieces out and see if you can make it more natural so that it's more like what you do with a typically developing child. And without data, you wouldn't be able to do that. So to illustrate that point, these are just two statements that you can say without and one with data. So I think he's getting better. His tantrums don't seem to happen as much, and they're not quite as bad. So that's something a parent can say to like a pediatrician or something, or when asked how the behavior is going. But if you collected data, you could say, well, before we started ignoring tantrums, he had an average of 3 tantrums a day, each lasting between 30 to 45 minutes. 1 week later, he's on to 1 tantrum a day and at less than 15 minutes. So that is really powerful, not just for behavior data, but if you're putting, like if your pediatrician is adding medications to your child's regimen, you can tell them exactly what's happening with your child. So if your child, they decide to put your child on ADHD meds or medication for aggression or something like that, you would be able to really tell them, inform them about how the treatment's going, and especially with medication, it's really important. So some types of data collection methods that we use are frequency and rate, duration, and ABC, and we'll go through these kind of one by one. So frequency is pretty easy to collect, pretty straightforward. It is also the most intensive because you have to look at the child the whole time. And you have to, every occurrence of a behavior you record under specific conditions, like it says, or for a fixed time period. So you don't want to collect data on, like, oh, I'm going to collect on 30 minutes and another day for 2 hours, because it won't compare, right? So you have the length of observation should be the same, and then the behavior should have a discrete beginning and end. So here for this kiddo, we observed tantrums on the left there, the frequency over 60 minutes. So before intervention, day 1, 8, day 2, 10, day 3, 9, and then after treatment, bad first day, 15, and then 0, 0. So you're kind of seeing that pattern.
Is that typical, by the way?
Yeah.
Or
The
like
first
one-
day?
Mhm.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a little bit too, because we call those extinction bursts. So typically when you put an intervention in place, things get worse before they get better. So I don't like putting like 0, 0, 0 because it's completely unrealistic. When you're changing expectations of a child, they typically resist because they've been reinforced for certain other behavior. So they're going to try to get what they want. And then they have to experience that rule. And then they're like, oh, okay, this is easier to do. So, or not. This extinction burst can last for a few days or weeks. That's okay. So the other one other recording system is duration, and this just you collect the length of time. Frequency, it's easy to collect for things that have a discrete end and beginning. So aggression, throwing, things like that. It's harder to collect data on like tantrums with frequency, even though I had them here as frequency. It's a lot easier to collect duration, unless your child's tantrums are really, it's just like a burst of 10 seconds, and that's it. If your child's tantrums change in duration, like some days he can tantrum for 3 hours and some days 5 minutes, then that's a big difference. So duration would be, go ahead.
Question, what if it's like different times of day? You just add all of it up or something? 'Cause
Depends,
you know what I'm saying?
depends on how you want to measure it. So if you want to do throughout the whole day, which I do not recommend because you're just going to be collecting data all day. So I recommend that you set a specific time of the day that you're really focused on collecting data. And then you select how I'm going to collect the data, and then you go ahead and do it. And then it always has to be the same length. When we collect ABC, we'll talk, like typically we collect all day, but we collect instances, right? So not like frequency, duration. But when we're collecting kind of baseline data, we want it to be on kind of the same time, same length of time. And you can kind of see like what are the times of day that are difficult, and then select that hour or so.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
5:30.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
There you go. So you know your target time, you know. But yeah, that's a good question. In school, we collect data throughout the entire day, because we can. There's one-on-one.
Yeah.
But you have to cook, and you have to clean, and you have to take care of your other kids, so it's unreasonable to have you collect data all day. So duration, again, this is not, it's difficult if it's brief events that are getting recorded. So it's really hard to collect duration on aggression or tapping or things that are just have discrete beginnings and ends. And then there's ABC recording, which is a very useful tool, and I typically use it at the beginning when I'm assessing behavior with almost all parents. So remember last week, and in your form it says ABC stands for antecedent behavior consequence. So basically it's a step-by-step process of looking at those three variables. And you record these, this is what I'm talking about, you record this during your normal routine throughout the day, but you just don't record how many times, you record what happened before and what happened after. And this is really helpful for us and for you guys to develop hypotheses. I don't have parents do this I have parents typically do this for a week because it is time consuming because you have to be aware of every time that the child engages in that target behavior. And if we get enough information from a week, then we're done, and I can use that to analyze the data. And if not, we have to do another week.
Is this information, your whole package there?
Yeah.
Is that something that could be made available for parents with newly diagnosed children? I remember very, very clearly when Pierce was first at NIA.
Yeah.
Lauren Haskins giving, and Lawrence, and also me,
Yeah.
A form asking for this kind of behavior. I didn't have a clue what it meant. I mean, I just didn't know anything about it, nor was I able to give her back the kind of information.
Because you didn't have the context.
Yeah, I mean, it was a form probably like this.
Yeah, we use these a lot.
I know what you're talking about too.
Yeah.
I had a little bit of trouble with that too.
Okay.
And I don't know if I called you or not, but I know that I did. I know exactly the form you're talking about.
And this, what I'm going to do in the next few minutes here is walk through exactly how to use a form like that, so that this will be on the internet for families to listen to. And our slides, we should put the slides on the internet too, so that they have access to
That's going to be on the
them.
internet?
Yeah, these slides.
Okay.
So that the parents, so our idea with these workshops is that people can come, but also that they'll be there in the website for other families that we can refer them to when they do find that, they have one of their main concerns is problem behavior.
Yeah.
And then Hillary knows them very well, so she can direct them exactly to which one will have the information that they need. But yeah, that's a good point. ABC recording is not straightforward. If you haven't done it, for me, it's like second nature. I look at the world and antecedents, behaviors, consequences. But that's not how everybody looks at the world. So let me, now talking about that, then let me go through how to do this. So this is a very simple ABC recording form. Typically the ones that I give to parents also have times on the left, so I can look at patterns of times. So the first thing you do here, number 1 in the middle, is record the behavior as it happens. Okay, so the child is having a tantrum. Obviously, if you have to manage the behavior, do that first, but then go to your sheet, write down aggression. The second thing you do is watch for the consequence. What did I do afterwards? What did the environment do afterwards? And then after the child is calm and you've managed the situation, think about what happened before. So last week we talked about the situation where the ice cream truck had to leave because the bus was late. So that's a big, clear antecedent. But sometimes it could be something really simple, like it was foggy and he couldn't go outside. It was like something more vague, like I was making dinner. So you're not quite sure what it was that was the antecedent. So for example, in this example, the child hits a peer. The peer gives a pencil back, and the teacher reprimands the child, so he's getting something tangible, and he's getting attention from the teacher. But the antecedent is the peer took the pencil from the child's pencil case. So you're starting to think, okay, so it may not be that he wanted attention, it may be that he wanted the pencil. So with enough of those data points, then we can kind of start developing a hypothesis. So once we have enough data, we go into analyzing, right? And we kind of review to see what the patterns are across all your data. So for instance, you might think that your child just hates taking a bath because every time that you ask him around bath time to take a bath, he's having a tantrum. So you start observing and recording information, and you realize that the tantrums are occurring more often, not every time that you tell him to go to the bath, but when he's engaged in something fun when you tell him to take a bath. So in this example, what the parent did was give a warning to the child when the child had a tantrum, like, you're going to have to go eventually. The child was engaging in tantrum, and the parent was like, okay, 2 more minutes then, 2 more minutes. So that means that the child was getting more access to the fun thing by having the tantrum. So a good intervention that we would think here would be to give the warning as antecedent, right? Okay, so in 2 minutes, we're gonna stop TV and bath time, and then we're gonna stop, TV to go to bath time, and then you can have more TV after bath time, or something like that. Just so that you're not warning the child after the tantrum, and he doesn't get the idea that, okay, so I can delay my bath by just having a fit, and then continue having TV.
Just a moment of interjection. I
Oh,
did
sure.
exactly the same thing this week. Pierce is absolutely obsessed with television.
Mm-hmm.
I started using the timer on my oven
Yeah.
to let him know how many more minutes he had before it was going to be turned off. And he would run back and forth from my living room to the kitchen
To check
see
it.
how much time, and it was working beautifully. I mean, it was really,
Yeah.
it was really working beautifully.
That gives
Still didn't like having the television turned off, but it worked well.
that gives the child predictability, and it doesn't leave you in the position of having to do the warning afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's a really
But
good
I was
strategy.
so pleased with his engagement with running from the living room into the kitchen, looking at the clock, and
That's great.
reading it, telling me how many more minutes he had.
That is a really good intervention. So good job. So maybe we can skip this part because most of you guys did not have these data sheets for last week. But if you're in the internet and you did, right now what I would do was have you guys explain some situations that happened at home this week based on data that you collected to see if we could to see what they suggest about the function of the behavior. But you gave a good example of your grandkids' behavior. So the antecedent was he was watching TV,
Mm-hmm.
you put the timer, and then the behavior was he complied with going to the bath, right?
And actually was anxious to be able to reach up and try and get to the button and push off the timer. Yeah, I mean, the whole thing worked really well.
So what consequence did he get for doing well with that?
Praise from me.
So praise from you. So that's kind of how I would split that. The story you told about the timer, I would split it like that. So now instead of the warning being on the consequence side, the warning's on the antecedent side.
Yeah.
And he got the attention for doing an appropriate behavior instead of the tantrum.
And we used it in reverse. You have this many more minutes before we can turn the television back on, as well as turning it off. So the timer works both ways.
Oh yeah, it works it works. Yeah, definitely. We'll talk about that here when we talk about treatment too. Do you guys have any
I was gonna say, do you have a visual timer too? These are awesome.
like the time timers?
Yeah, the time. They're like you can order them off of Amazon. They're not that expensive.
Yep.
And they're like they're like this big, and you can set it there for like 5-minute increments, and it's red. And so,
Okay.
well, for like
Yeah.
really little ones, if they don't know how to tell time,
Yeah.
they can visually see like how much time they have to do something or how much time they have to tolerate something that they don't like.
Right.
And they're awesome.
That's a really good way to begin.
We have just one of the little timers is what we've used for lots of different things. But no, I don't have one of those. But the stove thing has just been wonderful. I mean, yeah.
And I think he knows time, but for kids like 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds, the visual
Right.
is so good.
Sure.
And also,
He's about to be 9. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
and what we
My
do,
son would use that visual one.
Right.
Color it.
Which is great.
what I often like to do is, because the timers can also become something that they rely on always. So what I like to do is fade the timer out. So once they can wait for a certain number of seconds with the timer, then I treat it without the timer and just a more natural prompt, like you have to wait, and then treat it like that, and then increase the time with the timer, and then go back to teaching with just what you would do with any child, like just wait a second, just to make
You can't
sure.
always carry a visual timer around. Like,
Right, and just to
yeah.
make sure, at home maybe you can, so everything's running very smoothly, but if you're in the community, you want to make sure that the child can also wait without that.
Mhm.
So that's really important in kind of designing your interventions, that you're thinking about generalization in the community, generalization when maybe grandma or grandpa are there and they don't know about the visual timer. So, and they're going to say, just wait a second. You want to make sure that that generalizes. So, okay, so we'll kind of go back because we're talking about intervention, but so once you've determined the purpose of the behavior and why your child continues to having those challenging behaviors, now it's time to identify a function-based intervention. So a function-based intervention is a plan that allows the child to get what they want, but for appropriate desirable behaviors instead for the problem behavior. So like I had mentioned last week, we want our kids to get what they want. If they want breaks, we want to give them breaks. If they want their toys, we want them to get that. We just don't want them to hit themselves or others, for example, to get those things. So we may teach a child who's not speaking to point to a picture card or hand a picture card to gain access to food instead of hitting us or yanking us or pulling on us to get what they want. So that's kind of like the basic idea, right? Right, so we're identifying and teaching replacement behaviors, and then we just talked about addressing generalization. So one of the most important parts of any treatment plan is that we target generalization. So it is all good and well if a child can do 45 math problems before asking for a break with me in session, but then he goes home and he can't do any for mom. So the treatment has to generalize to home. The treatment has to generalize across grandparents, across other people that are going to be working with the child, and into the community. Because, it's really, we can make a lot of behavior change in a very controlled environment. The trick is to make it work in the real world. So if you ever get a behavior plan and it doesn't have a generalization plan, then you have to talk to your therapist about that, or your behavior specialist, or your teachers. So like, where do we go from here? Okay, yeah, so we're working on him waiting for 3 minutes. Great. So how do we take that into the community? How do we get him off of the timer eventually? Like, what are your plans for generalization? Is he doing this across people? Is he doing it across materials? So I've had children that are compliant, for example, with one specific task, but then when you present a new task, they're not compliant at all. And you've worked on a treatment, oh, it works great, but he can only sort blocks. That's not very useful for going to the bath or setting the table, things like that. So I can't overstate the importance of addressing generalization. So even if you're writing your own behavior plan at home and kind of doing it homegrown, I recommend that you write your plan out, even if it's really straightforward, because you want to make sure that if you have a babysitter, if grandma comes in, that you're giving them something, it can even be in a dry erase on your fridge. And what you should put on here is, so who's going to implement the plan? Typically, it should be everybody involved in the child's care. What antecedent procedures should be considered? So if you're like, use the first, then schedule. Every time that you give them a demand, then you put that on there, right? What are the consequences for appropriate and inappropriate behavior? So if you're doing potty training and you're leaving your child with an aunt, you want to make sure that if he has an accident, he has to go and sit on the potty for 5 minutes. If he has a success, he gets this cool toy that is only available for this. So you want to make sure that the person knows exactly what's been working. Where the plan will be implemented. So your sister asks you, what if I take him to McDonald's? Do I still have to do this thing of ignoring his aggression? You're like, yes. So it has to happen everywhere. And then this is more for you and for your team. Like, how will the plan be evaluated? Are you going to collect data once a week, every day? Are you going to have his teachers collect data? Like, how are you going to evaluate that it's working? Because even for me, it's very easy to be in a session and be like, oh man, that was awful. But then when I look at the data, I see, it decreased, the problem behavior decreased by 20%. I just wasn't seeing it. Or maybe one day I'm really tired and this child's screams really bother me more. And I'm like, oh, yeah, this is not working. But then when I look at the data, he really screamed 2 minutes as opposed to 15 minutes during baseline. So it really, like, if you take your own personal measurement, remember that we're flawed and we're subjective. And even me as a trained observer, sometimes I go into a session, I'm like, how did he do? How many aggressions did he have? Because I feel like that was a lot. And they're like, no, it wasn't that many. Or I feel like, oh, he's doing great. They're like, well, he did about the same as yesterday. I'm like, really? So your perception has a lot to do with how you perceive improvement. Okay, so let's talk about interventions. Specific interventions for different things. So this is kind of like the fun part. So antecedent interventions, like I said, are what happens before, and they're useful for a number of reasons. You know, they can help you set up a situation so that your child is less likely to engage in the problem behavior. So sometimes if the problem behavior is really severe, we don't want it to happen at all, right? So we kind of have to set up a lot of antecedents so that it doesn't occur as often. And also it will decrease the amount of time you're managing the problem behavior throughout the day, which is a nice bonus.
I have a question about that.
Go ahead. Yes?
So, like you were saying with the timer,
Mm-hmm.
as they get older, so you're doing a lot of work on the front end to try to avoid it.
Right.
But then when it gets to the point where they can
It
do
happens.
X thing, like wait in line for 5 minutes without having to hold your hand in the grocery store.
Yeah.
Just as an example.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Like, then do you start peeling off the things that you do on the antecedent so
Yeah.
that they don't always, do you start backing that off too? Like,
You do.
You do.
The
Okay.
same. So it depends on the context, right? But
Okay.
so the antecedent strategies allow you basically to sometimes decrease the problem behavior throughout the day, but there can be times of the day when you don't use them and you have the child experience there's gonna be hard, and you're gonna have problem behavior, and you provide the consequence that you're trying to teach them to learn. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But then you can schedule those times to your convenience so that you're not having to do that target every day. But you can do it at home, maybe with the therapist. Okay, so now we're going to target, we're going to change his routine.
I call that planned chaos.
Yes.
Like
Basically, that's what I do for a living, because we have scheduled sessions. Okay, like we're going to challenge you right now, and we're not going to give you what you want, and I'm not going to put a timer in place, and you're going to have to engage in communication or this or so you do have to still, the child has to experience the consequences in order to learn that the problem behavior is not going to work. But these antecedent strategies help you decrease the behavior throughout the day and maintain some semblance of control throughout the day. And once you, in those like controlled chaos sessions or planned chaos sessions, you're getting success, then you can start peeling off the antecedent strategies and see, okay, so now he's doing really well in these planned sessions at home. Let's try target for 2 minutes. And let's see if he can do it without that visual.
Okay.
And if you go to target, he can't do it. Okay, let's go back. How can we make home a little more similar to the store in these planned sessions? You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so you don't want to use these forever because these can be very intrusive and cumbersome. But I'll go through a few of these, and you can think about how you would fade those out. That's what we call it, like fading out the antecedent strategies. So one antecedent intervention that we use a lot is visual support, like the timer. And we experience those daily, like the speed limit signs control our behavior, although we typically know the speed limit, what behavior we need to engage in, but those help us remember gently. So this is a bathroom routine visual support. There's another one that I had where the child, I taught him some coping skills to do when he was getting upset. He knew them, but he just needed reminders at the beginning to engage in these skills. And this was at his desk, so his teacher could remind him if she saw him getting a little upset. And eventually this would be faded out because he'd start doing the coping skills naturally. Another really good antecedent intervention is establishing the clear rules. For example, on the left, I have 4 rules that a young girl who couldn't read had to follow in order to gain access to play. So she had to sit, be quiet, do her work, and raise her hand when she was done. So eventually she will know these rules and she won't need the visual. Actually, for that child, what we did is she self-monitored. So she was starting to self-monitor herself, and then eventually she didn't have to self-monitor because she automatically self-monitored. So yeah, these are, I often try to fade these out as to make the child as similar to their typically developing peers as possible. Another really easy antecedent intervention is just rearranging the physical environment. The teachers do this a lot, where you see they put the child in a specific desk that is closer to them or with less clutter. At home, one recommendation I always make when the child they really want toys and they have problem behavior taking access to toys is to put a lot of the toys away and then rotate toys. So anything you do to change the physical environment to assist you is a good antecedent strategy. Providing a rich schedule of reinforcement. I don't know if you guys have heard of catch them being good. So basically you provide the child many opportunities throughout the day to get reinforced for appropriate behavior. Not just when problem behavior would potentially occur, but throughout the entire day. And then you can also split things up into small components so they can get reinforcement for doing smaller steps of one activity. So if you're working on them eating and they ate one pea, oh, good job eating that pea, instead of waiting until they ate their whole plate. So you're kind of layering the reinforcement for the appropriate behavior and not waiting for those big situations to occur. Providing frequent breaks and breaking up tasks is something that we use a lot. So if you tell a child, okay, go clean your room, versus, okay, go pick up the Legos and then you can take a break here with mom. Okay, then go back and do your bed and then you can take a break. So that's more palatable a lot for some kids. So it's something that we use often. Using behavioral momentum. So behavioral momentum is a strategy that we use where we try to create a pattern of successes at the beginning. So, and then we ask a more difficult request that it's less likely. So if you know your child hates picking up Legos, but he will do his bed and pick up his Transformers, then you're like, okay, let's do your bed. Good job. Let's pick up the Transformers. Good job. Let's pick up the Legos. So you kind of get him complying with you and praising and or getting like reinforcement before you ask him the bigger demand. We do this with adults in our life all the time. You know, this is a natural, very natural strategy. Like, oh, can you pick up the milk? Oh, by the way, since you're in the store, can you also go to Costco and get this other thing and this other thing? And it typically works.
It works great on husband.
That's what I was thinking about. But, oh, I think there's an old slide because I also have in between this one and this one I have provide choices. So providing choices is also a really good antecedent intervention strategy because sometimes you can't make kids do what they don't want to do. And by providing choices, you're basically, they still are doing something that you want to. They're making a choice, but you gradually can modify the choice to bias them towards what you want them to choose. So you can do this tiny, tiny chore and get 5 minutes of play, or you can do the whole chore and get 50 minutes of play. So if you had said you really want him to do the full chore, but if you had said, oh, do the chore and you get 50 minutes of play, and they said no, are you going to guide him to do the whole chore? No, he's just going to refuse, and then he knows that you're not going to make him, right?
I think that also has a great empowering aspect to it.
Yes.
That he feels that he's in control.
Right.
That he has some control over what happens in his world.
This is true, and there's a lot of studies that show that if you allow a child to choose what they earn, the task they do, the paper that they choose to write things in, that there's a lot of research that shows that improves behavior and compliance. It also provides them ownership, right?
Exactly.
Okay, so I have a choice of what I get to do. They're still choosing one or two of your options.
Which homework they do first.
Right, which homework they do first, which pencil they're going to use, where do they want to sit. So providing...
But it's giving them some sense of control.
Right, yes. And it's also allowing them to choose what they prefer, which what they prefer is typically related to what's reinforcing. So, and what we prefer changes every day. So if we say, oh, this kid really likes attention, but maybe today he prefers quiet time. And if you allow him to say, if you say, okay, you can do your chores, and then you can pick what you want to do. Do you want quiet time in your room, or do you want to play with your sister? And he picks be within my room. If you had said, oh, you're going to play with your sister if you do your homework, the child may not have done it because that day he did not prefer playing with his sister. So you're also setting yourself up for success because you're allowing them to choose what they will work for and what they're motivated to get that day. And we do the same thing for ourselves too. Like, I don't always want ice cream. I sometimes want something else. I don't always want to go out to the movies. I want to, maybe read a book. So we get to choose those things daily. So kids should, be able to do that too. And then finally, providing effective instructions is really important. And this seems on the surface really simple, but I'll go through kind of what I mean when I say effective instructions. So delivering instructions can be really tricky. What I hear most often, or when I walk to a parent's home, is the parent standing on the other side of the room. Hey, can you go clean your room and come here, and then we'll do. And the child by that time has run away. So one important thing is to deliver instructions at the child's eye level and when they are engaging in eye contact. So get their attention and then deliver the instruction. And this also sounds really simple, but we're just so used to talking to people and asking them to do things without necessarily looking at them immediately. So that's really important with our kids.
Tell me something. Pierce still has a lot of trouble with eye contact.
Yeah.
If I ask him to look at me, and I can do this in a very positive way. Sweetie, I need you to look at me. I end up needing to turn his face towards me. I've read that the reason children on the spectrum avoid eye contact is that eye contact really is just for them very, very intense.
Right.
And that's why they're avoiding, it's just too stimulating or too something.
Right.
Is that true? Is that the reason behind it?
It depends on the child. But you're right that a lot of kids with autism try to avoid eye contact. So if your child is averse to engaging in eye contact, what I always do is instead of eye contact, have him turn your way so that that he's attending. Does that make sense? So if you feel that eye contact is aversive for him,
It's definitely.
then don't require it, but require eye contact to your vicinity, right? So look at me can be like, okay. And they can look somewhere down. And then we can work on eye contact another time. You know what I mean? Because eye contact then is a target that we're working on. It's hard to say why they do not engage in eye contact, but I have heard that for kids that are vocal, that is too intense and that they can't focus on what you're saying. So you have to know your child. Second piece is deliver instructions as directives, and this happens a lot, and it happens to a lot of teachers too. Oh, could you hand me that pencil? No. Like a child can say no if you say, could you, or can you, or can you please? If you state a directive as a question, it's basically stating a choice. Could you pick up your toys? No, Mom, I can't. Oh, I meant pick up your toys. So this is and we do that in polite life all the time. Like, oh, can you get that report to me by Friday? But you don't expect people that are working for you to say, no, I can't. So with kids, especially with kids with ASD, you want to be really specific. What I expect of you is that you'll do this, and state it as a statement instead of a question or an option, unless you mean it as an option. Deliver instructions in close proximity. This is particularly important for the little guys that are starting to learn, because if you need to guide them and help them to do it, you want to make sure that you're within arm's length. So with your son, if you're asking him, okay, let's brush your hair, you want to make sure you're close enough that you can help them, show him what you mean, right? Because if you're in the kitchen and he's in the living room and brush your hair. He did not listen, he did not do it, and he learned that when you say brush your hair, he could just ignore it and nothing happens. And then be really descriptive. So instead of saying clean your room, say specifically what you want him to do or her. Use more do requests than don't requests. So stop doing that is not a good request because you're not telling them what to do instead. So don't hit your sister. Okay, so I'm not hitting my sister, so what am I doing? So if the child's
I do that.
what?
I do that.
Oh, parents do that. It's natural because that's what you want them to do. So for example, if a child's like having glue all over the floor, or they were playing on the table with their crayons really well, and then they put all the crayons and glue on the floor, instead of like stop playing on the floor, tell them put your crayons on the table. So give a do request.
See, I do that with stuff like that, but it's like certain things I'll be like,
So if he's hitting his sister, an incompatible behavior would be like, come over here. And then he can't hit his sister because he's walking towards you. So think of incompatible, what they're doing that you don't want them to do. Think of something that they can do that does not let them do what they're doing. So if they're hitting their head, you could tell them, oh, hands down. They can't hit their head anymore. So does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then keep instructions simple. Especially, you have to know what your child receptively understands. So if you know that your child only follows one-step directions, don't tell them, oh, get your shoes and come over here, because it's two-step direction, and you're setting him up for failure. So try to keep the instructions at what they can do, unless you're doing a practice. Okay, now we're going to work on two-step instructions, and So let me look at the time. So we have a little bit to go here, but we only have a few minutes left. Can you guys stay for a little longer? What's your?
10, 15 minutes.
Okay, good. Then I'll kind of go through these a little quickly. Do you have to go? I know that you have.
I can wait.
10, 15?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So these are the 4 functions of behavior that we talked about last week. Right now we just talked about how to prevent problem behavior, and now we're going to talk about the consequence interventions. So how to respond to the problem behavior. So the consequences is what shapes behavior. That actually changes that behavior. So the 4 functions we went through last week were attention, escape, tangible, and automatic. Let's talk about attention first. So once you've identified that your child's engaging in this problem behavior to gain access to your attention, one of the procedures that you use to decrease that is extinction. And what extinction means is you're no longer providing the reinforcer for that behavior. For example, if you have a friend and you call them to get their attention, right? And they stop picking up the phone, you're probably going to call them a few more times, and if they continue doing that for a few days, you're just going to stop calling that friend. So that friend put that behavior of calling on extinction. Does that make sense? And this is where things get worse before it gets better. So, and that's what we were talking about, that extinction burst. So if your child's used to you saying, don't do that, when he does something, and that's why he's doing it to get your response, and you stop doing it, he's going to up that ante. Mom's ignoring me, she's continuing to cook, and I'm here knocking things over, and nothing's happening. He's going to, knock things harder. He's going to throw them at you. He's going to keep upping the ante to see if he can get that reinforcer. And if at any point he gets that reinforcer, he knows how high he has to go. So once you say, I'm going to do extinction, I'm going to ignore, you better ignore. Because you don't want to teach him how long and how hard he has to go. You want to show him no matter what you do, you're not going to get the full attention for this behavior. So this extinction is a commitment, and you have to be prepared for that. Another strategy for attention is timeout. There's a little bit easier if you have a place to put them in. So, if the child wants attention and he throws a table, Then you can put him away in his room, away from all positive reinforcers. So instead of just eliminating your attention, you're eliminating all positive reinforcers. That's what timeout is. Removal from a situation, which is similar, but not necessarily all removal of all attention or positive reinforcement. And then you cannot do remove or withhold attention from problem behavior without teaching them something of how to get the appropriate attention. Because if your child really wants to play with you, you want to teach them how to do that. So you typically don't want to do extinction if you don't have a procedure for reinforcing appropriate behavior. So that's what we call differential reinforcement. So when you put in extinction, you're no longer reinforcing problem behavior, you're differentially reinforcing appropriate behavior. So it could be communication, waiting for a parent quietly, whatever that you're targeting. And something really important is that appropriate behavior should always be easier at the beginning than the problem behavior. So you can't expect a child that has gotten your attention immediately for yelling to wait 30 seconds for attention at the beginning of an intervention. It has to be, the appropriate behavior has to be immediate, right? So if you teach the child to touch a micro switch to say, "Mom, please," you have to immediately, "Oh, yeah, good job," and play with him. You can't be like, "Oh, just a second," because then he's going to go back to the problem behavior that used to work really fast. So eventually you can give more delay, but this is the example from last week where Hobbs was growling to get Calvin's attention from like rubbing. This functional communication training is one of my favorite differential reinforcement strategies where you teach a child to communicate instead of engaging in problem behavior. So Hobbs here was growling to get access to problem behavior. Now that's on extinction. Calvin's not coming back. And then he's only coming back to rub his belly if he says, "Can you rub my belly?" So Calvin's more likely in the future to say, "Can you rub my belly?" instead of growling. So let's go to escape behaviors. Let me tell you that this is when I get children referred to me for problem behavior, this is typically the main area of concern. So if you identify escape or avoidance as a problem behavior, it's really important that you no longer allow the child to escape the activity to get problem behavior or because of problem behavior. So that's like how extinction looks like for this function. So it's very different, right? Because for the attention function, you're turning away, you're ignoring them. For escape, you're staying on them and not letting them out of that task. So sometimes parents are like, "Well, I'm ignoring the problem behavior," but if the functions escape, they're reinforcing the problem behavior by ignoring them because the child gets to not do what they were doing or needed to do. So that's why it's really important not to use timeout for escape behaviors if we can, because if your child doesn't want to clean up your room and you're like, "Fine, go to the timeout corner," he got to not clean up his room. And then for little guys that you can do this easily without a big fight, using guided compliance as needed is often necessary. So if your child is refusing completely to get dressed, you will guide them to get dressed so that they learn that it doesn't matter if you're tantruming 2-year-old, you still have to be dressed to leave the house. This becomes much more difficult and dangerous with older individuals, so I would not recommend it for like an 18 or 17-year-old. And what differential reinforcement looks here is instead of adding something to their environment, or you provide breaks, right? So, okay, you do a little bit for me, and then you can have a break. And then you gradually increase the amount of work the child has to complete. Another really good intervention is functional communication training, where you're providing the breaks when they ask for them. So, okay, I want a break. Okay, sure, you can go have a break. And at the beginning, you do it every time they ask for a break. So they may be in a break almost the entire time. But that's fine because they asked for it. So you're not reinforcing the problem behavior, right? And you gradually increase the amount of work. This also works for things that you want to avoid, like if the child wants to avoid the store because it's too loud. if the child wants to avoid playing with a sibling because the sibling's unpredictable and loud. So you can do the same thing. Okay, you have to play with your sister 1 minute and then you can take a break. We have to go to Target for 1 minute and then we'll leave, you know. So if you ask for a break and things like that. So it doesn't have to be like work. Our kids, like you were talking about, often want to escape other things like loud environments, birthday parties. Yep.
So we like say we're gonna go to the birthday party for 5 minutes, or like would you say like we're gonna go for 5 minutes and you're gonna sit in a circle and you're gonna sing happy birthday or you know whatever.
Right.
Whatever you think they can do.
Mm-hmm. So the important piece of that is that you are setting them up for success at the beginning. So think back of how long would he tantrum before I took him out of the party. So if he used to tantrum 10 minutes before you took him out of the party, but he started tantruming at 1 minute at being at the party, you know that he can handle 1 minute, you know? So I could say, okay, we're going to go to the party for 1 minute, and then we can go to the car and play some video games. Then we're going to go to the party again for 1 minute, and then we're going to go to the car and like take a little break. So you could do that for the entire party, or you could do a bigger one where he only has one option. You're going to go for 5 minutes, and then we're done.
Okay.
So
and then if you do the other
back and forth,
then they get
more exposure. Yes.
Okay.
So with a really tiny demand and a big reinforcer for a break, you get more trials, and you can use that one birthday party as if it were 13 birthday parties, right? Because if you do it, you have to just go for 5 minutes and then we're done. You got one practice trial.
Okay.
So,
that makes sense.
But if you do you could find a break place in the house. If there's okay, we'll go to the kids' room and play video games for a little bit, or we'll go to the kids' room and just decompress and read a book. You don't want to make the break so fun that they never want to come back to the birthday party.
Right.
So
he'll scan the situation and tell, no, I'll let you go. Or he'll tell me.
So it depends on what he can understand. He may want to have a visual. If he does better with visuals, first 1 minute party, then whatever reinforcer.
Okay.
But you know the main reinforcer is escape. So you know that he needs to be out, away from whatever he wants to avoid, right? So you need to make sure that it's not like, oh, good job, here's a gummy bear. He's still in the party. He didn't get the functional reinforcer.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Good. So once a child, they get that break or the one thing and then break, you want to start fading a little bit of those breaks out because you want your child to eventually be in the gen ed or you want eventually to go to the full party. So you can start replacing the breaks with other reinforcers like tokens and training the child to understand that tokens means escape later, right? Or avoidance later. So here in a token economy, you gain points for breaks or other reinforcers. And you can also identify other possible alternative reinforcers. So once a child doesn't really want to escape the situation as much, you can say, yep, once you get 10 of these things done, then you can have a little break in color, right? So you could do that with your child at the birthday party. Eventually, once he gets going with okay, you have to stay for 2 minutes. I'm going to check off. And for every check, you get 2 minutes of video games or something like that. A lot of families start with token systems without having done the first portion, and then they give up because the child doesn't understand what the tokens mean. They haven't taught that token means break, token means break, token means break. You have to do that a lot at the beginning so the child understands what the tokens mean. Tokens are not inherently reinforcing to anybody, not until they're paired with reinforcers. And then what we've talked about, other strategies, is modifying the task when appropriate. It's very important to not decrease the amount of task once the problem behavior has started. So if you tell your child 1 minute and then we can take a break and he starts having problem behavior, like, okay, 30 seconds, okay, 30 seconds. He knows that he gets partial escape, right? So, I get my task reduced if I complain. This happens with homework a lot. The child starts yelling, okay, you only have to do science then, and then tomorrow we'll do reading. So the child learn, oh, I yell, I get less homework. So it's really important that once you set those rules, you mean it and you stick to it. And then maybe tomorrow you won't ask him to do as much homework, but that's the next day, right? Or the next trial. So maybe with your child with the birthday party, if you say 5 minutes and he wasn't able to do it, the next time you try 1 minute.
So your advice being start small and work your way up.
Yes, for sure. But sometimes we take too big of a steps, and that happens to me all the time. So I'm teaching a child to get used to being in the bathroom, and I jump from 30 seconds in the bathroom to 60 seconds, and the child starts having problem behavior. I still make them sit in the bathroom that trial for 60 seconds, but maybe next time we try 45 seconds, you know? So he knows that the tantrum didn't get him out of what I expected of him, but now I know that I have to modify my expectations to meet where he's at.
To my son, it was the environment that the birthday parties were in. And I didn't realize that until this year, because my cousin has one for her daughter, and they're like basically like right behind each other in age. And it was the environments that she had the party at that he wasn't comfortable. So this year she had at the park. So he went through the whole party.
Right.
Like he didn't try to like run to leave or nothing. Like he went through the whole party.
So that's an antecedent strategy.
Yeah.
You change the antecedent, and then the child is able to like engage in appropriate behavior.
But you don't always have to. Yes, and I totally. It depends on the environment. If it's at a restaurant or something that he knows and he gets to sit there and eat dinner or whatever, he can hang out. My niece had. She's 8 years old and had a glow in the dark party with like strobe lights and black.
Oh my gosh.
You know, it's a kid on the spectrum's like worst nightmare. It was sensory overload even as an adult. And I'm thinking there's no way.
Right.
But I'm like, you're gonna go sing her happy birthday and then we can go. But
He did that.
But he did.
Good. So that was really good strategy.
But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, like some of the times I'll come a little bit late to a party so this, because I know how long he's going to last.
Right.
Or like I'll just come and be there at the beginning of it and, and then.
And there are some kids that, it builds up, right? So if you're there for 20 minutes, you will not get them back in. So you have to know what his limits are and kind of set it up so that he has success. There are some other kids that you can do the break. Okay, let's take a break. So you really have to know your child, and that's where a behavior specialist comes in hand, because they can work those ideas out with you. So let's try this, let's try that. Just because you tried it once and it didn't work doesn't mean that there's so many variables to change that can make it successful.
And that's so helpful in an environment that I know that he's not going to like. All right, let's try it in small bits and go back and forth.
Right. And collecting that data ahead of time, you can predict what are those environments for him. So, the world is very unpredictable, but you can predict some so that you can prepare him.
Question.
Yeah.
Sort of off subject, but is there, aside from payoff, as in I've done this and I've gotten your attention, can there also be an element that tantrum behavior or misbehavior is some kind of an outlet for the children? I mean, I see things in Pierce where I think that he is intentionally ramping himself up, and not because he's trying to get my attention. I sometimes feel like it's his
way of dealing.
His way of dealing, or his way of venting emotions. I'm not certain what it is, but I definitely see it as not being associated with get attention behavior.
And that goes to that function, the automatic function or sensory function. So I have worked with many that we're going to talk about in a second. I've worked with many kids that engage in aggression or throwing just for the sake of aggression and throwing. There's no social reinforcer. Yeah. So we'll talk about that. Let me go through tangibles, and then we'll talk about the issue you're talking about. Tangibles is the most easy to understand. A lot of kids have problem behavior to get access to toys, food, things like that, activities, going to the park. Same procedure of attention. So tangible and attention are still positive reinforcers, right? It's things that they want to get from the environment. So you use extinction, timeout, or removal from situation, and you provide the tangible or appropriate behavior. But here you see the visuals are a little bit different. You're teaching them to request for specific items. You're teaching them to take turns. You're teaching them to wait. So the strategies for treatment are slightly different, but how you treat the problem behavior is the same. You don't give them what they want for problem behavior, basically. And obviously, I'm always on my soapbox about adding communication. So we need to replace those problem behaviors with communication first. And then we talked about delayed access, which is really tricky with tangibles because sometimes our kids want what they want and they want it right now. So that's kind of the challenge that we get with tangibles. So let's talk about sensory or automatic reinforcement real quick, and then we'll be done for today. So if a child engages in behavior to gain automatic or sensory reinforcement, we talked about this last week. We do it all the time. We take aspirin to relieve our headache. Nobody gave us anything from the environment or took anything away. The sensory feeling, like we're escaping that headache, right? Or we scratch to escape a sensory thing. Or sometimes when we're frustrated, we go like, to relieve some of that stress. So we do things that are automatically reinforcing all day long. Like we do that all day long. And so do our kids. So when you say that, you think that, if he's at a certain state and he's screaming, that may be automatically reinforcing to him. That may be how he's coping to decrease that sensory feeling. So that's possible. Sensory and automatic reinforcement are the hardest to treat because we can't control what's happening inside of their bodies, right? So behavior analysis, we try to focus on what's observable, and this function is one of the hardest to treat because we can't control it, right? We can't provide or take away the headache, or we don't really know what's happening often. So how we treat these is we decide, is this a behavior that can continue occurring? So scratching, yeah, people should continue scratching when they have an itch. So can the behavior continue occurring, or is it so severe that it cannot continue occurring? Okay, so if a child's scratching because of an itch, that's fine. If they're scratching enough that they're bleeding, that's not fine. Like you don't want them to scratch, hurt themselves. So that's the difference between hand flapping versus head banging. So if a child gets really excited at hand flaps and it's not impeding anything in their environment and not really affecting their social interactions, it can continue occurring, just we have to determine when. Head banging could cause concussions, traumatic brain injury, things like that should not continue occurring. So that's kind of the first step. So if the behavior can occur sometimes, like hand flapping, humming, what else is automatically reinforcing for us? Reading a novel is automatically reinforcing. So if the behavior can occur, but it's occurring too much and at all times. So if a child is hand flapping constantly so much that they're not engaging with anybody. So what we can do is teach the child that the behavior can occur in some contexts, but not others. So on here we have like a little red and green board that, I taught a child when he could talk about a specific topic and when he couldn't, because he was talking about a specific topic constantly. For example, animals. And it didn't matter who was there or not there. He just wanted to talk about animals. And so you can reinforce the lack of the behavior with access to that behavior. Okay, so you have to hang out with your friends for 2 minutes, and then you can go and talk about animals, or if the behavior is hand flapping, okay, so you have to, during work, you can't hand flap because you have to work, but then after work you can engage in hand flapping.
My little guy's tiny, so you could actually physically stop him from, well, not tiny, he's a 4-year-old. So is the thought that when they're small, you try to
block it and redirect? I mean, you want them to do it independently based on the consequences in the environment, but definitely like blocking sensory extinction, we'll talk about that next,
Okay.
is something that is a good strategy for automatically maintain behavior that can be blocked. There's some that you can't block, but yeah.
Okay.
So another thing that you can do besides reinforcing it with the actual behavior is reinforcing with alternative reinforcers. So you try to find other preferred things that they want besides the automatic stimulation that they'll stop engaging in the behavior for. And we often are able to. So with behaviors that you do not want to occur at all, like let's say that the behavior that you're talking about, you don't want to have it occur at all. You could do various things. One of my favorite things is to provide competing stimulation or alternative stimuli. So for example, if a child is hitting their head or scratching her arm, maybe putting like sleeves that like provide pressure will decrease the need for that child to scratch. And some of these are matched the stimulation. So if the child's scratching, let's apply something to the arm that will reduce the scratching. Some are not match sensory, so they're just preferred items. Or if the child has a preferred toy, they don't scratch as much. What you don't want to happen is that you provide those items when they're having the problem behavior. You want to do this ahead of time because you don't want them to learn like, oh, if I scratch until I bleed, somebody put these nice things that provides great stimulation on. So you don't want it to become a tangible function issue, right? But then the other thing is sensory extinction, and that's what I was talking about when you were talking about your child hand flapping. But sensory extinction, as with other extinctions, is a commitment because what you're doing basically is saying, I know that this is stimulating. I'm not going to let you do it at all until that behavior extinguishes, right? But you have to block it every single time, at all times. Does that
Yeah.
So this is a commitment, and I only use this with severe self-injury,
Okay.
and when we have staff that can block that. So sensory extinction, like what you can do is block it and then teach him, in this situation, we don't do this, but you can do it in other situations. And so it's a little different, but you're not really using sensory extinction. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And like over time, providing them something else they can do that gives
Right.
them that outlet.
That's right. So for kids, like your example, I would try to find a competing stimulus or an alternative stimulus, and or an alternative skill for coping. So I teach a lot of kids different coping strategies, taking deep breaths, doing different things that can replace that other behavior to calm them down or do whatever sensory stimulation that's achieving. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and Pierce will say, he knows a lot of those coping behaviors. So he'll say, I need to take deep breaths, or he'll do or I need to time out. Yeah.
Okay. And, we don't always do it. Sometimes when people cut in front of us in the road, we have some verbal aggression. Although most often we can be like, okay, take a deep breath, it's fine, and calm ourselves down without. So, kids have resurgence or relapse or, they're human too. So I don't expect 100% zero, or I don't expect 0% problem behavior ever from any person. Briefly, timeout. I've talked about timeout a lot. Do not use it for escape, maintain problem behavior. If you are going to use it, make sure the child goes back and does what they need to do. Because if not, they're going to learn that they don't have to do it. And then finally, the points to remember, be consistent and follow through. Once you deliver that demand, don't back down and just follow through. It's going to be rough for a while, but reconsider your strategy later. Teach replacement behaviors. Huge thing. Teach replacement behaviors and think about generalization when you're doing that. So when selecting a replacement behavior, make sure that that's going to work in multiple places. So if it's a sign that you create at home, nobody's going to understand that in the community. So make sure that it's something that's generalizable. Use effective reinforcers, and reinforcers change for a lot of kids. So you have to kind of collect data, reevaluate, And remember, the reinforcer are not just the edibles or a toy. Their escape, their attention, their sensory escape, sensory, there's a whole variety of things that the child may want. And if you're giving them a tangible for everything they're doing, you may not be using effective reinforcers. And then use visual supports when you can, like the timers, like the schedules, like the first then. Use them to your advantage so you can survive the day. But then remember to fade those so that the kiddos can be as typical as possible. But also remember that we use visual stimuli all the time. Like I'm using visual supports today. We're using visual supports today. Remember that using some natural visual supports is very normal. We won't have time for this, but if you, later for you guys or for folks on the internet, I'd recommend that you brainstorm treatment strategies for your kids and reach out if you have some questions about treatment development. One last thing, if your child is having some severe problem behavior, please reach out to a professional so that they can help you address, and particularly if it's self-injurious and aggressive and it can cause injury or harm to themselves, others, or property. And that's it.
Thank you so much. This is very helpful.
Thank you for coming. Yeah.